So there's this word, gamification, and you may or may not have heard of it, but basically what it is taking the principles of gameplay and using them in other situations like educational or corporate situations where you're trying to incentivize a certain kind of behavior or certain goals. For instance, you might use experience points and leveling up to encourage students to do their homework or behave a certain way in class. It's almost like a glorified star chart. Or you might use teams and competitive concepts to encourage different groups in your corporate workplace. And all of this is sort of tied to these what we often call RPG elements or leveling up, gaining bonuses, feedback loops that include rewards of some kind. These are designed to sort of get into your head, make you strive not just to complete your work or your learning, but to do that in order to gain a reward, even if that reward is something sort of abstract like experience points or however you want to frame that. Gamification is somewhat controversial. Not everyone agrees that it actually works all that well. But you can certainly see how in some situations this kind of incentive would be potentially a positive way to inspire kids who are accustomed to games already to have a little bit more motivation in the classroom, or to make to shake up the corporate culture and give teams some sort of stake in a race or a competitive environment. But why it's interesting to me is I feel as though gamification has been brought back full circle into video games. And a lot of video games these days, especially open world games, especially Ubisoft games that have this sort of open world checklist template where there's a lot of resource gathering, a lot of crafting, a lot of leveling up, skill trees, unlocks, where a large part of the point of the game has become to sort of finish all these little tasks and all these grinds. We are always, in the Division or Destiny, are always trying to one up your current gear set with something better, and that makes you more powerful and more able to do, harder versions of shit you've already done. This to me is the gamification of video games, where the emphasis has been traded for the emphasis is no longer on story, not necessarily even on mission design or level design, but on addictive feedback loops, on the grind, on the perpetual sort of gerbil wheel gameplay model. We are always running forward and never getting anywhere. Even as you feel like you're getting to that level cap, or you're getting to that that rare piece of gear. You found it now. Well, now there's a new update that raises the level cap, adds more gear. You're not playing necessarily new content, really. You're not given new stories. You're just given more of the same repetitive, tedious shit, and you have to now go do that again. Now, for some people, this is exactly what they want to be doing, and that's fine. I don't begrudge you, your love of tedium and whatever. If you like to finish, the same basic formula over and over again, that's great. But personally, I think that a game like The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild is sort of a tonic for this. In so many ways, it breaks that chain, and we see what games could be like, even open world games. They could be something more, not so wound to RPG elements, not so wound to this grind, but tied to something else, to emergent gameplay and finding your own path and exploring just for the sake of it, without feeling like you need to clear every last section. I mean, maybe you do. Maybe you've been trained so thoroughly by these other games that you feel like you need to 100% Legend of Zelda. But I don't think that's what the game is trying to get you to do. I think it's just letting you go out and sort of experience that world however you like. And it's not perfect. I mean, there's too much cooking, you know. And you know, I'm not sure, as good as the tower puzzles are, you know, climbing more towers is sort of a tired mechanic at this point. We've seen it in a lot of games. So maybe there could have been something more interesting than that, but at least they do it well. You know, my go-to in video games is often Dark Souls when I talk about how I think design should shift away from sort of this generic RPG checklist type gaming with big flat open worlds to something that's more handcrafted. I mean, Dark Souls is an open world essentially, but it's gated off quite a lot more than certain games, and then traversing that world becomes sort of an interesting puzzle in and of itself. Legend of Zelda takes a different approach. It doesn't really gate anything off, but it still has that handcrafted feel to it. But I think, you know, and I've argued this before, but I think Dark Souls might even be a better game without any leveling or crafting at all. One of the things I hate is, you know, I'm late in the game and I've got a plus 10, you know, greatsword or whatever, but take your pick, whatever weapon. You've leveled it up, you've made it exactly how you want it, and now any weapon you find is kind of so underpowered that there's no point in using it. And I've always thought it would be more interesting if the weapons in a game like Dark Souls, you know, each had their own move set and their own powers, but you couldn't make them more powerful than when you found them. The basic level of damage isn't going to shift too much. I mean, a greatsword will do more than a dagger, but a dagger's faster. And it was really more just an action adventure game without the leveling and stuff, because you'd have to scale enemies, like their hit points later in the game, down. But I don't think that would matter. I mean, I think the variety of enemies and the different play styles you need to engage those enemies is more important. And I think even more interesting would be, you know, if enemies you met later in the game were particularly susceptible to certain kinds of attacks, so that you had to make a choice of weapons and figure out what worked in every given situation, rather than just buffing your primary weapon as high as you could get it and then end up playing Dark Souls 3 with the dark sword the entire time, you know. So I think that the great thing about Zelda is that it is calling into question some of these sort of accepted normal game. I mean, pretty much almost so many games are using these elements, like skill trees, like crafting, like unlockable maps, question marks and exclamation points everywhere, and just so many games are using this very similar template. You know, from Horizon Zero Dawn to Tomb Raider to Assassin's Creed to Watch Dogs and, you know, Ghost Recon Wildlands, and so many of these games just, you know, they all do it a little differently, but it's all pretty much the same. And I think that it detracts from what we can create in our own experiences if we're given more of an emphasis and a focus on story, on gameplay mechanics, on our own handling of problems without our hands being held. The last game I want to touch on is The Witcher 3, and I said this at the time, and I've said it ever since. It's a great game. It does a lot right, but I think the open world actually detracts from what could have been a more powerful game with a more poignant story and better game mechanics if they had scaled all that big openness back and focused on making a tighter game with better controls. And you know, I don't even people who really like The Witcher often kind of gripe about the controls. And it seems to me that if more focus and resources had been placed in that instead of in creating just a really big world with tons and tons of content, that we would have had a better game. So I think that a game like Zelda, and there are other games like it, but I think these games call into question sort of generally accepted game design principles, and they call into question what we enjoy in other games. And as my Forbes colleague Paul Tassi pointed out, you know, he was addicted to a lot of these sort of grindy systems, and it was very hard for him to pull away from that when he started playing Zelda. But the more he played, the more he felt a sense of freedom as he let go of some of those habits in a way, this addiction to sort of checklist style gaming. And I think that's wonderful. And I want to see more of that. So as always, thank you for watching. There's a written version of this rant, which I will link to below in the description. Also, you can subscribe because you love me and I love you. And like the video, hit me up on Twitter, in the comments. And, you know, let's have a talk about video games. Peace.